Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today as we explore one of the most critical events of the 21st century, the war between Russia and Ukraine. This war has shattered cities, taken tens of thousands of lives, displaced millions, and shifted the global geopolitical landscape. But to truly understand this conflict, we must go far beyond the headlines and viral videos. We must understand its roots, which lie not in 2022 but decades earlier. In the fall of the Soviet Union, the strategic ambitions of Vladimir Putin, the expansion of NATO, and the deep cultural and political divide between East and West. This is not just a story of two countries clashing over borders. It is a tale of identity, power, history, propaganda, and survival, one that continues to evolve and define the future of Europe and beyond. Let's go back to the beginning and uncover the full background of the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine and Russia share a long, complex history that dates back over 1,000 years to the days of Kyivan Rus, a medieval state founded by the Eastern Slavs in what is now Ukraine. Both Ukrainians and Russians trace their cultural and religious heritage to this early kingdom, which adopted Christianity in 988 AD. Over centuries, Ukraine found itself under various empires: Polish, Lithuanian, Ottoman, but most significantly, the Russian Empire. In the 17th and 18th centuries, large portions of Ukraine came under Russian control. While Ukrainian culture and language survived, they were often suppressed under Russian rule. In the 20th century, Ukraine became one of the most important. Republics in the Soviet Union, agriculturally rich, industrially vital, and strategically located. But Soviet rule brought pain as well as development. The trauma of collectivization, the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions in the 1930s, and decades of repression planted seeds of national identity and resentment. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine's declaration of independence was both a celebration and a statement. Never again would it be under Moscow's control. The people chose a new path, but that decision was not accepted easily in the Kremlin. Russia had always seen Ukraine not just as a neighbor, but as an essential part of its empire and identity. After independence, Ukraine stood at a crossroads. Between the East, led by Russia, and the West, represented by Europe and NATO, the country was politically and economically unstable, and both sides wanted influence. Some Ukrainians favored a closer partnership with Europe, hoping for reforms, democracy, and economic opportunity. Others leaned toward Moscow, feeling cultural, economic, or historical ties. In the 1990s, Russia under Boris Yeltsin recognized Ukraine's borders but retained deep influence through trade, energy, and politics. Russian gas flowed to Europe through Ukrainian pipelines, giving Moscow leverage. But everything changed. When Vladimir Putin came to power in 2000, Putin, a former KGB officer, saw Ukraine's independence as a historical mistake. He viewed the collapse of the Soviet Union as a tragedy and believed that Russia's status as a great power could not be restored without Ukraine. Ukraine, to him, was not truly sovereign. It was part of Russia's sphere of influence, a place where Western influence had no place. Over the next decade, Putin used soft and hard power to pull Ukraine back into Moscow's orbit. Meanwhile, Ukraine was navigating a fragile democracy. Corruption plagued its governments, but elections were held and political life was vibrant. In 2004, the Orange Revolution erupted after claims of election fraud. A pro-Western candidate, Viktor Yushchenko, who had survived a mysterious poisoning, won a runoff vote. The Kremlin was alarmed. Putin saw this as a Western-backed intervention. He responded by using economic pressure, media influence, and gas cutoffs to destabilize Ukraine's path toward Europe. The pattern continued. Ukraine was caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician, was elected president. Moscow was pleased. But in 2013, a crucial decision changed everything. Yanukovych had promised to sign an association agreement with the European Union, a first step toward deeper European integration. But at the last moment, under Russian pressure, he reversed the decision and turned to Moscow instead. This sparked outrage. Massive protests erupted in Kyiv's Independence Square. They were peaceful at first, then turned violent as security forces cracked down. The movement, known as Euromaidan, represented more than a desire for EU membership. It was about corruption, dignity, and the people's right to choose their future. As the protests intensified, the situation spiraled out of control. In February 2014, Yanukovych fled the country. A new pro-Western government took power. This marked a breaking point for Putin. The Kremlin viewed the revolution as an illegal coup orchestrated by the West. Russia claimed that Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine were in danger, a false narrative used to justify what came next. Within days, unmarked Russian troops, known as Little Green Men, appeared in Crimea. They seized control of government buildings, airports, and infrastructure. In March 2014, after a hastily organized and widely criticized referendum, Russia annexed Crimea. This was a stunning move, the first major annexation of European territory by force since World War II. The international community condemned it, but Moscow ignored the outcry. Simultaneously, armed pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk declared independence from Ukraine. These movements were directly supported by Russia with weapons, fighters, and intelligence. Thus began the Donbas War. For the next 8 years, eastern Ukraine became a frozen conflict zone. Ceasefire agreements were signed, including the Minsk Accords, but never fully implemented. The war killed over 14,000 people and displaced more than 1.5 million. While the world's attention shifted elsewhere, the region remained on edge. During this time, Ukraine strengthened its military and deepened its ties with NATO, though it did not become a member. Western countries provided training, equipment, and political support. Moscow saw this as a creeping threat. In Putin's view, Ukraine was becoming a de facto NATO outpost on Russia's doorstep. By late 2021, Russia began moving massive numbers of troops near Ukraine's borders. Satellite images and intelligence reports showed military buildup on multiple fronts, north, east, and south. Putin made public demands. NATO must not expand further, and Ukraine must never join the alliance. The West rejected those ultimatums. Then, in February 2022, after months of tension, Putin delivered a chilling speech. He denied Ukraine's legitimacy as a state. He accused the West of turning Ukraine into a hostile, anti-Russian platform. He claimed he had no choice but to act. On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. It was a full-scale assault. Missiles struck major cities. Russian tanks rolled across borders. Paratroopers landed near Kyiv. Putin called it a special military operation. To denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, propaganda words meant to justify aggression. The world watched in shock. But what many expected to be a swift Russian victory turned into a nightmare for Moscow. Ukraine's army, vastly outnumbered, resisted with unexpected strength. Civilians took up arms. Zelensky, once mocked as a comedian, became a wartime leader and symbol of defiance. Western nations rallied. The US, EU, and other allies sent billions in military aid, including anti-tank weapons, air defenses, drones, and intelligence. Russia, meanwhile, faced unprecedented sanctions. Its banks were cut off from global systems. Assets were frozen. Multinational companies pulled out. Yet the war dragged on. Cities like Mariupol were reduced to rubble. Mass graves were found. Civilians were targeted. Atrocities shocked the conscience of the world. Millions of Ukrainians fled, creating the largest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Globally, the war caused ripple effects. Food prices soared due to Ukraine's role as a grain exporter. Energy markets were shaken, especially in Europe. Developing countries suffered from inflation and shortages. Diplomatically, new alliances began to form. Countries like China watched carefully. India, Turkey, and others tried to remain neutral, balancing between East and West. But in Europe, NATO became more united than ever. Finland and Sweden, long neutral, applied for membership. Military spending rose across the continent. Ironically, Putin's war, meant to stop NATO expansion, led to exactly the opposite. Inside Russia, repression increased. Independent media were shut down, protests were banned, thousands of Russians fled abroad. Others remained silent, fearful of long prison terms under new censorship laws. Putin solidified power, but at great cost. Russia became increasingly isolated, economically, culturally, and politically. Yet he showed no signs of backing down. For Ukraine, the war became not just a fight for territory, but a fight for existence. The people rallied in unprecedented unity. Soldiers, volunteers, doctors, and teachers all played their part. The nation's identity crystallized under fire. Ukraine emerged not as a divided country, but as a proud and determined people standing against a superpower. As of today, the war continues. Front lines remain active in the east and south. Thousands more have died, peace talks have failed. Both sides accuse the other of unwillingness to compromise. Ukraine demands full territorial sovereignty, including the return of Crimea. Russia refuses to give up occupied regions. The world watches anxiously. Billions have been spent. Lives have been shattered. And still, there is no end in sight. Thank you.